Hello, church. So glad to be with you today. I just am so excited about what we're doing tonight as I get a chance to interview a friend. His name is Wally Rendel. But so many in our church don't know the complete story. Many of you have not met the people who helped Centerpoint get off the ground. There were people thinking and dreaming and praying about a church on the northwest side of Lexington in the late 90s, early 2000s. So before many of us probably even lived in this area. And so tonight you get a chance to meet one of them who was very instrumental in helping the church get started. And so tonight I'm sitting with Wally Rendel. Wally, how you doing today?
I'm doing well.
Doing good. Wally's been in ministry a long time. How long have you been in the ministry?
I started preaching when I was 17 years old, and I'm 47 now.
47. There you go.
I've been at it a long, long time.
Long time.
And what a blessing. Yes.
You started a church in Northern Kentucky.
I did. It was First Church of Christ.
First Church of Christ.
Was there for 7 years, and then Southland Church and Wayne Smith said, we want to plant a church on the south side of Lexington.
Okay.
Would you and Barbara come and bring your family and be church planters? And so we did that in 1972.
The year I was born.
Oh, hey, yes.
The year I was born, you came and started a church.
Started the church, and we were there for 34 years at Southern Acres Christian Church.
34
and that's
years.
Where, during that ministry, the Boltons.
We met each other.
We met each other, that's right.
So we moved here in 2000 and started our ministry, and very early on you said, Brian, I want you to go to the Bluegrass Christian Men's Fellowship meeting with me.
Yeah.
So why don't we tell the church a little bit about the Bluegrass Christian Men's, what was their mission, their purpose, what was your involvement? Tell us a little bit before we start bringing in the Centerpoint story.
Bluegrass Christian Men's Fellowship was a monthly meeting of men from our churches who would get together, have a meal, and have a speaker, but their goal was the planting of congregations, new churches. And so you can look all over central Kentucky, and the Bluegrass Christian Men's Fellowship oftentimes had something to do with that. And so we would come and meet and eat and meet and preach and then gather up funds for the starting of a new church. And I think maybe you might have said, well, why should I go to that?
Well, I did.
What's in that for me?
What I recall is you took me to the first meeting.
Okay.
And I walked in and I thought, what am I doing here? I am 28 years old, and all these guys were like 55, 60 and above.
That's right.
You had gray hair. And I walked in your office and I said, Wally, why do you want me going to these men's fellowship meetings? Do you remember what you said?
I think because the purpose of what the fellowship is all about, and secondly, you can meet our men and get to know our men.
That's exactly. You said planting churches is at the heart of evangelism, and you are our evangelism pastor, so you need to be there. And I honored you out because you're my boss. I said I'll go. Now, truth be told, I went to those meetings many times, going, "Why am I going to these things?" They drove me crazy at times.
Little did you know.
Little did I know
what the Lord had in plan.
But what God started doing was I'd pray before those meetings, say, Lord, speak to me. What am I supposed to do in these meetings? And I started learning how to worship with different styles and honoring God with different preaching styles, and really started to enjoy the meetings.
Right.
And then they tapped my shoulder and said, hey, why don't you get involved here with this possible hiring of a pastor? But that was because they had dreamed of planting a church. So do you know about when they started the idea of planting a church? Was that like 98, 99?
It would have been around 98, 99, the turn of the millennium, 2000. Right. And so then the men said, well, what about the northwest corridor of Lexington?
Why at that time in the late 90s,
yes,
Masterson Station had been started, and there was nothing else out there.
That is correct.
So what did the men know or see that said we need a church on that side of town?
Well, it was obvious that those who studied the demographics of Lexington knew that was the growing corridor of Lexington. Citation Boulevard, coming around. There was industry there.
Right.
But there was all of the housing developments that were plotted, Masterson Station, namely. And there were fellows like John Fulton at Broadway Church, who was leading the fellowship.
Right.
Brad Walden, who was minister at Tate's Creek Christian Church. So they did a lot of studying about it, and
saw that future growth was coming.
field. That's
Yeah.
right.
Now we landed on Greendale Road. So it was around 2000 when they were looking at the property on Greendale. It got down to about the last quarter of 2000. He says, I'll sell it to you, but it has to be done by the end of the year of 2000.
Okay.
And so they had to figure out how we're going to buy this land.
Right.
So they had to have church meetings because the men's fellowship didn't have their own funds, and they had to have sign on line. So that's where these other churches got involved.
Mm-hmm.
Who are those churches? Broadway Christian Church,
Tate's Creek Christian Church, Southland Christian Church, Gardenside Christian Church, Southern Acres Christian Church. Yeah.
All these churches had meetings and said, yes, we'll take the note on and we'll buy that property.
Yeah.
And finished up that deal by the end of the year to buy 18 acres of land for $535,000.
Was that what it was?
That's what it was. $535,000. So today we're here because these churches and the men's fellowship had a vision and a dream to say we need to be on that side of town.
That's exactly right. You know, Frank McKinley,
and Pat Massey,
and Teddy Carpenter.
Oh yeah.
And of course John Fulton and probably Joe Essenbach and some of the predecessors, but it was Frank McKinley,
right,
and Pat Massey, who were members of Southern Acres, that really got behind the work. And we presented a check at that time to the fellowship for $50,000
to help
from
buy the
our
land.
mission ministry to help buy the land.
Right.
And that's the way that land was purchased, is churches that got together and individuals that got together, put their money together to get that land over 2 or 3 years, got it, paid for.
I know Broadway Christian Church committed $100,000 to $20,000 a year over 5 years towards helping. And that's how all that came together. Now, I was going to men's fellowship meetings, and Jim Bird comes to me and says, Brian, I want you to get on my team to search for the new church planter. We needed some young people to be on that team, he said.
Yeah.
So there was 5 of us that were looking for a preacher. We weren't having much luck, and people wanting to come to Kentucky. And eventually they turned and they said, Brian, you need to do it.
Yeah.
And I thought, they're crazy. Because our kids were in diapers and pull-ups.
Yeah.
And I won't make a long story out of what could be a long story, but my wife and I said, let's consider this.
Yeah.
And our first thing considering was, I've got to talk to Wally, my boss, and say, Wally, they've asked me to plant this church. If he says no, we're not ready to release you, then I'm done. I'll stay at Southern Acres.
Right. Frank McKinley and Pat Massey, they said, Brian is the man. He's the man. Jim Bird, others, and so it was a great day for our church because we could be a part of
that,
planting a new church.
And you said our church will get behind this and support it. And then you had me up on the stage on a Sunday morning, and you shared with the church, Southern Acres, said we're going to plant a church, and we're sending Brian and Brianna Bolton to go plant it. And I didn't know this, but you said our church is giving $75,000, and anybody in this church that wants to go help, go.
Right.
Where's that heart? Where's that come from? I didn't know that. It blew my socks off that you would put money and tell your church people, if you want to go, go. You weren't worried about keeping them in your flock. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I know, but it's just a matter of, Southern Acres wouldn't have been there had it not been for Wayne Smith and Southland Church.
Right.
Who did that helped plant that church and told people, you go be a part of that church. And I knew in my heart of hearts, I mean, I don't know many pastors that want to tell their people to leave.
Nobody does, right?
No, because I mean, it's hard enough to get them.
Right.
But in my heart of heart, that was the right thing to do. And to put the money and the interest and the prayer and the people into it. And there were folk from our church that went.
There was some, yeah.
I remember Barbara and I was talking about this. We went to worship with you one Sunday, and there was Roy and Dorothy King.
Oh, yeah.
They'd been, members of our church at Southern Acres for so long. Here they were there, and John King, of course, and family, and others, and from Gardenside, and from Broadway, and they formed the nucleus for Center Point.
They jumped in, and I don't think if you wouldn't have said, "Hey, go if you want to go," I don't think people would have come.
Yeah.
And there was many who came. And then you gave me an office and gave me space and said, use it because you're a church planner
Yeah.
until you need to move the other side of town, and let us do that. And we went to other churches and talked to them and said, would you come be a missionary in your city for a year? Help us get this church off the ground.
Yeah.
And church after church said, come share with us. Come share with us. Tell us what you're doing. And little by little, people from different churches across the city came and said, hey, let's get this going.
Right.
And you served on our oversight team.
Yeah.
Talk to me about our oversight team and why that was needed.
Yeah, Jim Bird, I believe.
Jim Bird, Lance
Ladd, and
John Fulton.
John Fulton.
Joe
I was on it. A few, because, starting a new church, you didn't have a board of elders, overseers.
Right.
So you need a oversight committee that reported back to the fellowship,
right.
Responsible to the fellowship. So we were able to meet with you as needed, and met there at Southern Acres Church often.
And help me not to do stupid things, right? Because sometimes church planners come up with some ideas. You're like, well, let's not waste the Lord's money, right? There's times like that. Or times to encourage, because it's time in the world. It's discouraging sometimes. And you guys kept blowing the wind in my sails, fanning the flames of faith, so to speak. What do you remember? What stands out to you just during that season of ministry in your life?
Well, I remember the interest and the excitement that was in our congregation, in the fellowship, about planting a church on the northwest side of Lexington, and just the excitement of gathering up the money, of being able to go and present a check from our mission team, to, those are exciting days. The fellowship got behind it. It was so exciting to see what happened, as you launched, and we're meeting in Meadowthorpe School, and you got the church in a box, and all of those things coming together, and your first service is there, and the groundbreaking then on Greendale Road.
Right.
Those are just, things that I remember. Now for 20 years, it doesn't take long to grow a mushroom. A few hours, but it takes years to grow a church, and faithfulness. And you all you've been there, you've been faithful, you're continuing to be faithful, and the church is just moving into some of the greatest days of ministry.
Oh, man.
There were probably some times when you wondered,
There's many a day when we're ready to throw in a towel and be done.
Oh, I know, and but man, look what has happened.
Look what has happened.
And the mission field has come to Center Point.
20 years of ministry and doing this 20-year weekend just made me really dream and think back.
Yeah.
And how thankful I am just to know there was men in the 90s who were thinking of a church, early 2000s thinking of a church.
Right.
Faithfully said, we're going to do this. And many of the men, some have passed on. Brad Walden one.
Well, sure.
Massey,
Wayne Smith, Palmer Young.
They're in heaven.
Yes.
And they haven't met anybody, but they're still impacting lives today who are going to be in heaven because they had faith.
That's right. That's
because they believed.
Yeah.
And I'm so encouraged, and I'm thankful. I'm thankful to the Bluegrass Christian Men's Fellowship. I'm thankful you made the phone call back in 1999 and said, why don't you move to Kentucky? Never thought I'd live in Kentucky. And now Kentucky's my home. And I believe two blues, Wally. There's one just slightly closer. It's that amazing blue, but that UK blue is really close. So I'm thankful to you and thankful to your wife, Barbara. You guys have been constant encouragers and have been a blessing in so many different ways. Especially in the early days, the phone call would come. Wally, just checking in. How you doing? Keep the spirits going. And look what God has done. And I hope that just being with us for this weekend encourages you in this season of ministry. And you go, man, God has used me, because the people are in heaven and people have been baptized. People are saying yes to Jesus. You've been part of that.
Yeah.
You've been part of that at Center Point.
Thank you so much. I'm just so excited. Your attendance is growing, interest is growing, and I'm just so encouraged. Here you are at the 20, really 20 years, you're just still a young church.
You're still a young church, really.
Still a young church.
Right?
And just to think about what the next 5, 10, 20 years is going to be.
Yeah.